Hi everyone and welcome to a new video. Now, as you can see by the title and the thumbnail and everything, this is going to be an analysis, that's so hard to say for like a non-native English speaker, an analysis of the poem The Thought Fox by Ted Hughes. Now, don't blame me for talking about Ted Hughes again, go and blame Mark at Words Everywhere, because he is starting a book club of not a book club, a poetry reading book club thing, where we read a poem and then do an analysis of the poem, and he puts up a video and we are allowed to film a response, and that's what I'm doing now. Therefore I will link his video on his analysis. It's so hard, you can't even imagine, in the description box, because I will put my video up as soon as he has put his up. Yeah, so you can blame him and not me for talking once more about Ted Hughes, because I obviously jumped straight onto that occasion and said yes, I will do one as well. So yeah, so you can also blame him for me reading the poem, because I'm really bad at those things if I don't do them in German, or I guess it's great practice. Bear with me, I will link the poem in the description box as well, so you can read along with me and get a little bit more out of the poem. So don't blame me if it doesn't sound great or anything. I will just stop the disclaimers and move on, right? So the poem is called The Thought Fox. I imagine this midnight moment's forest. Something else is alive, beside the clock's loneliness, and this blank page where my fingers move. Through the window I see no star. Something more near, though deeper within darkness, is entering the loneliness. Cold, delicate as the dark snow, a fox nose touches twig, leaf. Two eyes serve a movement that now, and again now, and now, and now, sets neat prints into the snow, between trees and warily a lame. Shadow lags by stump and in hollow, of a body that is bold to come. Across clearings, an eye, a widening, deepening greenness, brilliantly concentratedly coming about its own business, till with a sudden sharp hot stink of fogs it enters the dark hole of the head. The window is starless still, the clock ticks, the page is printed. Now, again, I'm sorry if I butchered that, but I don't think so. I think it was quite alright. Now, my analysis will mainly focus on the relation between this poem, or how this could relate to Ted Hughes' personal life. Therefore, I will also be reading an excerpt out of his essay collection, Poetry in the Making by Ted Hughes, obviously, because I think there's something to say about that, but we will get into that later. But firstly, I want to point out something that I realized the first time I read it, and now second time even more, just like a general observation which didn't really fit into what I'm going to say later, and that's the I'm sorry if you hear like the trucks passing, just ignore it. The work with colors. He does use, like, for example, darkness, and he also uses the expression dark snow, which at first is weird, but like looking at the setting that we are at night makes a little sense. But the contrast between the dark and the actually bright white snow is quite interesting. but he also uses, he clearly expresses how deeply green the fox's eyes are, and I really wonder what he was thinking about, like putting the colors into quite a bit of the center of the poem. So if you have any thoughts on that, let me know in the comment section, or maybe link me to your video if you made one. Again, as I mentioned, I have my notes here. I think it's important to acknowledge that this poem is quite influenced by how Ted Hughes saw himself and his surroundings, and how his surroundings reflected his own personality. So therefore, I think it's interesting to see that Ted Hughes was quite fascinated by discovering and looking at our primal instincts, the one we still have, the one we used to have, and the one, for example, nature or like animals have. And I think this is widely discussed in this collection, The Hawk and the Rain, which also consists the Thought Fox. I have a hair in my mouth again. This is, by the way, the Faber Modern Classics edition. So this is widely discussed in all of his poems, and many other poems are inspired by that theme, but I don't think that they are that explicit as the poems in this collection about the primal instincts. So Ted Hughes, I've read a book about the relationship between Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes, therefore I get that from doing a little research and reading that book. Ted Hughes saw the fox as a representation, or we can read the fox as a representation of Ted Hughes himself, because he saw the fox as his totemic animal, because he was highly fascinated and influenced by the mythology and symbology. As you can see if you read Crow, which is basically heavily inspired by mythology. So yeah, that's where I started with Ted Hughes, and you can see his interest in that collection quite well. And he therefore identified himself with the fox and used the fox as a representation of himself, which is quite important for like my later discussion. But firstly, I would like to read you that paragraph I mentioned, how, or like that few lines, quite a few lines, quite a few paragraphs actually, but I think here it is quite important to let the master speak for itself and not me summing or trying to sum up what he's saying. So I will read you this excerpt on his opinion on the Thought Fox in this collection. It's also by Faber and Faber, and I will read from page 20 to 21 if you have the same collection. So it says, or he says, this poem does not have anything you could easily call a meaning. It is about a fox, obviously enough, but a fox that is both a fox and not a fox. What sort of a fox is that? Is it that can step right into my head, where presumably it still sits, smiling to itself when the dogs bark? It is both a fox and a spirit. It is a real fox. As I read the poem, I see it move. As I see it setting its prints. I see its shadow going over the irregular surface of the snow. The words show me all this, bringing it nearer and nearer. It is very real to me. The words have made a body for it and given it somewhere to walk. If at the time of writing this poem I had found livelier words, words that could give me much more vividly its movements, the twitch and the craning of its ears, the slight tremor of its hanging tongue, and its breath-making little clouds, its teeth barred in the cold, the snow crumbs dropping from its pads as it lifts each one in turn. If I could have got the words for all this, the fox would probably be even more real and alive to me now than it is as I read the poem. Still, it is there as it is. If I had not caught the real fox there in the words, I would never have saved the poem. I would have thrown it into the waste paper basket as I have thrown so many other hunts that did not get what I was after. As it is, every time I read the poem, the fox comes up again, out of the darkness and steps into my head. And I suppose that long after I'm gone, as long as a copy of the poem exists, every time anyone reads it, the fox will get up somewhere out in the darkness and come walking towards them. So you see, in some ways, my fox is better than an ordinary fox. It will live forever. It will never suffer from hunger or hounds. I have it with me wherever I go, and I made it, and all through imagining it clearly enough and finding the living words. So yeah, you can see by that how important the fox was to Ted Hughes. And you can argue that the fox is a representation of Ted Hughes himself, but also of the poem, but we will get into that later as well. It is also known that one time when he was struggling to finish writing essays for university, that he saw a fox-like man in his dream. So you can really say that this fox is his fox. And it's very interesting, the whole situation with the fox appeared in his dream, or this fox-like man appeared in his dream, as this poem is set during nighttime. So, then if you look at the night, if you go from there, you will have to ask yourself, what does this night mean in here? Or like, what is the meaning of the night in this poem? And you could argue about, is it the loneliness, or is it mostly the loneliness that gives like the poet the inspiration, or maybe the time or the motivation to write poetry? Is it the darkness every poet needs to write poetry? You can argue about that, but you can also make the point that it could also be the overbearing amount of ideas that you try to write down and you try to find words, but you are not always able to, and it could be the struggle, like it is almost, you have those ideas, but it's almost like a black hole that like sucks you up because you are not ready to express your ideas that you are having about what you want to write in this poem, but you are not able to really write them down. So you have to ask, is this poem about the discovery of oneself, or about Ted Hughes's journey to find himself, maybe as a poet, but also as like a human in general, as we know that he is so fascinated about that symbology and how he identifies with the fox. But it could also, and I think this is the way of interpretation I would go into, is this the reflection of the poet forming an idea that then ends up in a poem? So could this poem be somehow self-reflecting? Because to me, it's like you have this idea that has this force that almost can torment you, and maybe in your sleep, and it's slowly forming itself like to a concrete poem. Because if you look at the poem, we have the fox there mentioned firstly as something else is alive, so it's not clear what it is. Then we have the appearance of a fox nose. Then we see some prints in the snow. Then we see his eyes, and just at the last couple lines we see as he calls it, a sudden sharp hot stink of fox. And if you look at that closely, the first time the fox is mentioned as something else is alive, we get also the line, and this blank page where my fingers move. So at that time the idea is still very vague, the fox is still very vague, and the poem is still forming itself. But then when we get the sudden sharp hot stink of fox, the last line reads, the page is printed. So the poem formed itself. So to me, this is a poem about quite a self-reflecting poem, as it is like the poem tells the story of its making. We start out with the blank page with the idea forming in your mind but not really being there, and end up with a poem printed on a page. And this I found quite interesting, because that's what Ted Hughes does a lot in his poetry, that you think, oh, that's a nature description, or oh, that's a description of an animal, but it's actually something else and is connected oftentimes to his life or his writings. And you can almost just see that in a second read, and maybe in a third read, when you really sit down and analyze the symbols in it. And therefore that's why I'm so fascinated by Ted Hughes, that he is not directly telling you this is how I write my poetry, but he is telling that through the process of observing this fox, which has a very deep meaning to himself. So yeah, that was just like my 2 cents about this poem. Definitely let me know if you have filmed or plan to film a response to Mark's video, and yeah, definitely go check his video out as well. And thanks for watching, thanks for listening to me read a poem. And yeah, I will see you in another video. Bye.